Are you all right, my love? I wasn't too rough with you, was I? Well, good. I have a tendency to give in to passion, get a bit lost, and with you, well, let's just say I could hardly keep myself from devouring you. And who could blame me? Don't you go hiding under the duvet from me. Are you blushing? Again? My darling angel is so susceptible to teasing, aren't you? And another shade of red has been reached. You adorable thing. Come here, love. I was not asking, baby love. That's it. That's it. Snuggle up against me, sweetheart. There we are. Are you warm enough? I can close the window if you... I am not fussing over you. I simply want to make sure you are as comfortable as possible. How is that a bad thing? But you are my baby. That is, if you'd like to be. You actually remind me a lot of myself when I was young. The way you light up when speaking about your writing will never cease to warm my heart. Oh, on the contrary, I wish you would passionately ramble far more often. Your mind is something I'll never tire of discovering. That is, if you allow me, of course. I was a writer, not anywhere near the level to which you are. A woman writing wasn't exactly an honourable thing when I was your age. I'm not sure you're ready for that part of my story just yet. I am far older than I appear to be, and the last thing I want to do is scare you off. So you know what exactly? And just how long have you suspected that I'm not human? Oh, honey, I'm not mad at you. Quite the opposite, in fact. It's a relief that I don't have to do some big song and dance and come out of the immortal closet to you. I do need to ask you something, but I've not been sure how to go about it without scaring you away or coming across accusatory. When you're around people or deeply connected to them, do you get a sense of what they may be thinking? Of their energy? And once you get a sense of that energy, do you ever feel as though you can knit together fragments that seem like their thoughts? So you know that you're a telepath. Well, yes. Being empathetic is a part of that, actually. Most telepaths begin with just that, a lower level of perception of others, and then as you learn to decode their energy, you may begin to get a sense you can hear what they may be thinking. I'm not entirely sure how it works in humans, to be honest. I never developed any of those abilities while I was still living because, well, to be honest, because it scared me. I was not exactly surrounded by the type of people who would have good things to think about my being such an independent and free-spirited soul. And so I shut that part of me down. Vowed to never again open my mind because I feared that if I could sense what others were thinking, that line of communication would go both ways. And with what I was thinking and feeling by that time, with my sexuality a conundrum not to be explored in those times unless I wanted to risk being burnt at the stake, I ran from myself, from my possible gifts. I was born in October of 1567, and as the one surviving child, it was up to me to further the bloodline, at least according to my father. They had my life all mapped out for me before I could begin to express a single want or thought. I was to marry a man, bear his children until I birthed at least one son to honor and fulfill my duties as a good wife, and then spend my life raising my husband and my children. Well, as a writer, it was all done in secret. I wrote more as a young teenager, lost in thought in her room, than I ever was able to as an adult, because there was simply too much at stake. The risk in my husband finding out I had thoughts of my own was too great. And so I would only write when he was away and the children were fast asleep. Little stolen moments for myself by the light of the fire. Yes, I had 4 daughters and died giving birth to my son. Well, sort of. There was a woman, as is often the case, whom I'd met just after becoming pregnant with my son, Elias. She was so different from anyone I had ever met in our little corner of Stratford. She had come from London to rest and escape the noise and rush of city life, and after we met that day under the watercolour skies, as the sun set, I knew she was special. I knew that I would be better for having known Serafina, no matter how long I was able to bask in her beauty. I was 28 years old and profoundly lonely. My husband had little interest in me and would often vanish for weeks at a time. He told me he was travelling and gathering information about various farms who may be in need of litigation advice. He had become a barrister at his father's behest, but chose to use his skills to help the common man. At least, when we were first wed, that was what he was doing. As time went on, I became certain my husband had an array of mistresses, which was fine by me. The less that I had to service him, the better as far as I was concerned. No, it wasn't for lack of attraction. I was what we call now bisexual, but there was no term or speaking of that back then. And so I shoved my feelings down, locked them away, and told myself that he would be enough. And in the first few years of our marriage, he was. It was only once we drifted apart, after the birth of Elizabeth, our second child, that things changed drastically. After Lizzie was born, I developed a deep sadness, unlike any I had faced before. I'd battled with what we classify now as depression since I was a little girl, but something about what they called the blues was different. I could do nothing for myself. I ate because I needed to be able to breastfeed Lizzie. I made food for our elder daughter, Margaret, because she needed me, but there were days even that was too much. Margaret was but 4 years old at that time, and bless her little heart, she did all she could to help her mummy get by. I still recall the panic and tightness in my chest when I awoke late in the afternoon to find both of my girls weren't in the house. I was terrified that my husband had come home, found me in a state in bed, and had taken off with them to punish me. He knew that my girls were my world, that in spite of how low I was, they were my sunlight, my brief glimpse at what happiness could be if I could ever find myself again. When I ran through the gardens calling for them, I was greeted by Margaret, urging me to be still. She calmly took my hand and led me over to a little house their father had built for them, and tucked away in a basket inside was little Lizzie, sleeping soundly. Lizzie had a very difficult time sleeping at night. She would cry and cry for hours, and my husband, who was the one with an education, told me to leave her. That if I kept going to her when she cried, I would only cause her to become dependent. How it pained me to lay in bed, wide awake as she cried and cried. So, when I had gotten her to sleep just before the sun rose, after days of that torture, Lizzie had been awoken when Margaret was attempting to play quietly with her toys. I suppose, in her guilt and worry, she rushed Lizzie outside before I could be awoken, and took it upon herself to feed and coax her back to sleep so that I could rest. It was very sweet, but she should not have had to be mother to her own sister. And with me pregnant with what would end up being our third daughter, I had to do something. I had to find some way to cope that was better than this. So I began to write again while my husband was away. Well, of course he has a name, sweetheart, but it brings me great pain to even speak his name aloud, even to this day. I am forever grateful that he blessed me with 5 beautiful and healthy children. But he was also my captor. He was the one who saw my wings and clipped them. I met Serafina and everything changed. I met her, and for the first time since I was a young girl hiding in my closet with a candle in order to read and write the never-ending thoughts that coursed through my young mind, I felt that freedom again. A belonging, if you will. I had been writing for about 6 years by that time, and I'd amassed quite a catalogue of works. Serafina pored over every word there, just right in front of me. She even took what I'd written thus far, all the scraps of paper, and hid them away at her little country cottage she was staying in. We would hide away in that cottage, and she would trace her fingers across the pages as she read aloud, before tracing those same graceful fingers across every inch of me, devouring me with more passion than I had ever experienced. And I realized, all at once, that I was falling in love with her. And she knew it all too well. But, as often is the case, my joy was short-lived. For once my husband, Paul realized that Serafina was the source of my all-encompassing joy, he shamed and berated me for it. No, I don't think he ever dreamed that she and I were intimately connected. I'm not certain he could fathom any sexual pleasure being possible without him present, honestly. Yes, I suppose you could say Paul was a bit of a fuck boy, as you say. What happened next is not something... It's not something I'm proud of. But I was a woman who had been pushed too hard for too long. Paul demanded I never contact Serafina again. And as the unspoken laws of the times go, she had to oblige. My first love was gone in the blink of an eye, and the depression that followed was not easy to gaze upon. I had a nanny by that time, as Paul was doing very well financially in his work, and that allowed me to shut out the world, to push everyone away except for the life that was growing inside of me. And so just as I had when I was attempting to keep my head above water and would nourish myself for the sole purpose of being able to breastfeed Lizzie, I did the same for Elias as he grew and developed throughout the pregnancy. I would eat and drink, but could do little else. And what Serafina did not know was that this was the end of the road for me. The doctors had advised we not try for another child after our 4th daughter, Diana, was born with a great deal of complications. She was healthy, Thank God, but I barely survived. How do you tell a man hell-bound on having a son that you won't bear him any more children? And so we conceived for a fifth and final time. And as I lost far too much blood delivering Elias, my husband did not stay by my side and beg me to fight, for he knew his words would only fall upon deaf ears. Paul did the only thing he knew to do. He sent for Seraphina, and she arrived like a force of nature. I could hear her shouting and cursing him every step of the way as she ran to me. My Seraphina, my protector, my warrior, come to rescue the fading princess. Only I did not want to be saved. What Paul did not know was that Seraphina was the last piece I needed in order to let go. I knew my children would be better cared for by others, that their memories of me did not need to be further tainted. And so I let go. I let go, and Seraphina cleared the room and fought for me. She did. She sired me that day in her grief, for she was far from through loving me, and I her. Well, particularly when someone is that near to death's door, being sired takes on a very different process. I had to die in order to return, and she knew that. Seraphina wrapped up my body and carried me without a word out of the house. Once she was out of sight of my family, she allowed herself to use her full strength in order to run with me, held tightly to her chest, hiding us away in a manor in the hills. She was by my side for the months it took me to get the hang of things, to recover from the great trauma, and to adjust to other predilections, as it were. And she was there for the parts I had not expected to pain me as they did. I had 5 children between the ages of 10 and newly born, who I had to give up in the instant Seraphina chose to turn me into a vampire. When she chose to save my life. To them I had died and was buried, but to me, I was still alive. I was still alive, and I was finally happy. I could not bear missing seeing them grow. I know it must sound incredibly selfish for me to grieve what I willfully gave up, but you are far too kind to me. I promise you that I don't deserve it. Well, no, I would never ask you to earn my kindness or understanding, but yes, no, you're right. I'm sorry to have gone on for so long. I'm sure I could have simply said I had 4 children, Fell in love with a woman when I was pregnant with the fifth and died in childbirth, only to be sired and given a second chance at living. But I... I simply... There is something so special about you, my love. A way in which you set my heart and mind at ease, and I could go on forever losing myself in your eager eyes. All of this to say, I am in fact a vampire, and you are a budding telepath and witch. And perhaps we have more to teach one another than I originally thought. Was that night the first time she offered to turn you, as you call it? Right, sire. How long after Amelia told you this grand tale did she offer to make you a vampire as well? To grant you the same gift of immortality this Seraphina supposedly granted her? No, I don't mean to be condescending, but I also don't think it would be helpful for me to state things to you as though they are fact, when they are impossible. You do understand that all of this is impossible, don't you? A fan of Alice in Wonderland, I see. Good catch, love. And you're right. It was indeed a quote from Through the Looking Glass. Only Alice was never real, and neither are vampires, or magic, or any of the rest of it. Some things are truly impossible. And not even the Queen, with her 6 impossible things before breakfast, can change that, sweetheart. Perhaps we need a change of pace. Why don't we go and get August, and we can see what they have to say about things. Maybe between the 3 of us, we can at the very least offer August the closure they deserve. Yes? All right. And thank you, by the way. I know sharing that much with me could not have been easy. You respect Amelia's privacy, and this must feel like a horrendous nightmare. But it will be all right. You're home now, with people who love you and only want the very best for you. And I'm going to help facilitate that for you. Well, yes, I am a bit young to be a cult deprogrammer by most standards, but I've found that since escaping a cult myself, my being younger helps me to better relate to the patients I meet with. It's not always popular with parents, who often attempt to dismiss me, but I'm not so easily dissuaded. But enough about me. There will be time for that later, after we see some more progress from you. You can think of it as a reward, You give me pieces, and I'll give you pieces from my own story. All right? I'm gonna go get August now, but I want you to know that I will not allow anyone to bring hostility into these sessions, into this room, or to berate you. I will not allow anger to overtake this safe space that you and I have created together over the past few days. But I'm gonna need you to trust me, and trust that I know what I'm doing. Can you do that? Very good. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. You're doing great. All right. I'll be right back.